Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our lecture, From Allied to Anti-Racist with Jonathan Kanter. My name is Liliana Lengua. I'm the director of the Center for Child and Family Wellbeing in the Department of Psychology here at the University of Washington. And we're incredibly fortunate to be able to host our lecture this evening. Our center conducts research on promoting children's social emotional well-being and mental health by focusing on supporting the well-being and skills of the adults in children's lives, their parents and caregivers, and providers who work with them. We work to translate research into effective evidence-based practices and to collaborate with community to bring those practices to bear. Our public lectures are one way that we work to bring research to real-world practice. And we're grateful for the opportunity to have Dr. Kanter with us this evening, recognizing the critical task for all of us to support children and families by being anti-racist. We had hundreds of people register for this evening's lecture. So with so many people, we won't be able to have an open back and forth conversation and Q&A with our speaker. But we will take questions, and Jonathan will answer questions at the end of the presentation. So please type your questions into our question box. And I'll hopefully try to get to most of those questions, but if not, we'll keep a record of them. Also, if you have any technical issues or need to reach the hosts with questions, you can use the chat for that. And it's my pleasure now to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Jonathan Kanter. He's the director of the Center for Science of Social Connection in the Department of Psychology at the University of Washington. Over the course of his career, Dr. Kanter has collaborated closely with members of Black, Latino, Muslim, LGBTQ communities and other marginalized communities across both scientific and social activism efforts, including police brutality, voter engagement, racism and discrimination, mental health stigma, and culturally appropriate psychological treatments. His center comprises an active team of students and colleagues who work to integrate established findings on bias with the science of relationships to produce innovative bias reduction strategies and to teach people how to connect across group differences that typically divide us. Dr. Kanter has published over 100 scientific articles and books on these topics, and he is regularly invited to give talks and workshops nationally and internationally. Dr. Kanter also is a core team member of UW Medicine's Office of Health Equity, which provides anti-racism training for the UW Medicine system. And he consults on anti-racism efforts in the legal profession and in educational settings. His center's work on racial microaggressions, as well as on how to connect across political differences, has recently been featured on NPR, in the Seattle Times, and other media outlets. And so it is my pleasure to turn this evening over to you, Dr. Kanter.
All right. Good evening, everybody. And I am sharing my screen here. And that's not right. I apologize. 1 second. That should be right. There we go. I'm sharing my screen here. Thank you, Lily, for the introduction, the wonderful, warm introduction that I provided to you by taking it off of my website. So I appreciate that very much. I also have to say, no, I'm just kidding. I also have to say it's interesting to give a talk these days. It's like I've been waiting here for 15 minutes in a largely empty room. And then all of a sudden in the last 3 minutes, 150 people come scrambling in. It's like a mad game of musical chairs at the last second here in some virtual room. Such is how things happen in 2020. Anyway, I'm starting with this image here on my screen of a picture that I took at the Green Lake Rec Center, which I think offers 2 simple phrases that sum up the year of 2020 for many of us. I believe we are closed and Black Lives Matter. But that's not all of it, right? In 2020, it's been quite a year. In addition to the pandemic and all of its consequences and chronic racial injustice, we have the climate change and wildfires clogging our cities and landscape with smoke, and of course the upcoming election, which is causing stress for everybody. It feels as if societal stress and maybe what we could call existential despair are at an all-time high for many of us. And then on top of that, we have all of the personal stress that is going on in our lives. So it's a lot, right? It's quite a moment that we're living through. And I think at times our minds can tell us that we just can't take anymore, that it's intolerable. And so I thought I wanted to start, since we're focusing on mindfulness today, to ask everyone to slow down and to offer a gentle, hopefully helpful reminder that we actually, as human beings, have incredible capacity to take in stress. I honestly don't know if I have too much wisdom in life, but one thing I feel wise about is that sometimes life is nothing more than being like a water balloon. And my goal in life is to just keep expanding, taking more in, gently, gracefully, without breaking. And I just would like to ask everyone to consider the possibility that we can take this in. We can keep going. Take a few breaths and keep going. Of course, many of us know that stress is bad for our systems. It's bad for our biology in many ways. That's true. But at the same time, we as human beings are evolved to handle on a day-to-day basis a heck of a lot of stress. So here we are now. I think it's typical for a talk to have a thank you slide at the end. I want to start with the thank you slide for a few reasons. First, I do want to thank Lily and the great team at the Center for Child and Family Wellbeing for the invitation to give this talk. It's a great opportunity, and I appreciate the work you all put in to make this online mechanism work for all of us. Also, I'm here by myself giving this talk for all of you this evening, but it's really important for me to acknowledge and recognize that I am a part of a big team of collaborators and colleagues who have supported me and propped me up and improved the work and made it better and helped me develop and helped me succeed. And I've listed just a few of them on this screen here today that I want to just acknowledge. And just one particular shout out to my close friend and colleague, Dan Rosen, who has done a lot of this work with me and in fact is sort of the prime creator for some of the exercises that we'll do tonight. So hopefully I will honor Dan's work as well with this. Okay. I also want to start with the land acknowledgement. This is a slide that I've borrowed from the Office of Healthcare Equity team at UW Medicine. I think it's an important slide. So I'll just read it real briefly. Assuming most of us are in Seattle, then the land that we are occupying today is the traditional home of the Tulalip, Muckleshoot, Duwamish, and Suquamish tribal nations. And without them, we would not have access to this working, teaching, and learning environment that we're all in tonight. And I personally genuinely would like to humbly thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. And if you like this idea of land acknowledgements and recognizing the indigenous populations, there's more you can do. And I've put a website there for Real Rent Duwamish that you can go to and actually contribute rent to the Duwamish Nation. Okay, so here's what's going to happen tonight. For about the next half hour or so, I'm going to walk you through some slides, give you the landscape of the situation that we're in and why we're doing the work that we're doing on mindfulness as a way of overcoming the obstacles to anti-racist action. So I'm going to talk for about a half hour, and then the second half hour or so, I'm going to actually lead you through some exercises, which hopefully you'll appreciate. One of them in particular, I'm going to tell you right now, is pretty hard. It brings up, for at least some of you, it brings up some painful feelings. So I'm just warning you about that. You'll of course have choice as to how you participate, but that is upcoming. And then as Lily said, the last part of it will have some question and answer, and I'll try to address any questions you all have. But I'm starting with this slide. And I want to be clear that most Americans in the United States agree that racial discrimination is a big problem. About 76% of Americans think that racial discrimination is a big problem. The issue that we're facing today is not what people's attitudes are. The issue is, how do we turn those attitudes into sustained behavior and action? And this is where the obstacles show up. And I just want to start with this slide and say that my assumption is that all of you here with me tonight are in that 76%, that we're all working from this belief that racial discrimination in the United States is a big problem. If you are in that 9% of the United States population who believes racial discrimination is not a big problem, well, I'll simply say that my talk tonight is not for you. I'm not going to debate or argue any of this stuff. That's not what this is about. What I want to do tonight is I want to work with people who believe racial discrimination in the United States is a big problem, but also recognize that it is hard to sustain action and effort. It's difficult, and I want to help people with that. Okay. So I think the difficulty can be described as a difficulty aligning our behavior with our values, with our anti-racist values, and recognizing that there are obstacles that get in the way, that block us from acting on our values. So we're going to walk through some of these obstacles in a few minutes, but I just want to start with this slide. We have some white protesters there on the left in Seattle, Washington. And of course, it's great that people went out to protest and to support Black Lives Matter and to support other anti-racism efforts. But the question is, what do we do after the protest is over? How do we keep it going? How do we engage even deeper? What are the obstacles that get in the way, and how do we overcome those obstacles? And so I'm going to focus on mindfulness tonight. I'm going to give you some exercises for what we can do. I'm going to focus on values, and I'm going to focus on action. And while I'm primarily going to be talking about the obstacles that get in the way for white people, I want to be clear that these principles, these ideas are, of course, not just for white people. So here on the right, I have a picture of some Black protesters in Brooklyn, New York. And even though this is not the work I do directly, I have some close colleagues, some Black colleagues, who are essentially taking these same ideas of mindfulness and values and action and using them to help Black people cope. I don't know if we want to call it healing or overcoming racial trauma, or simply dealing with the daily despair and exhaustion and burnout that comes from having to activate and to fight. But these ideas are broadly applicable. So for me, just some inspiration across a few different cultures and a few different contexts. On the left, we have that famous image of the Chinese man facing down a tank in Tiananmen Square from years ago. And I don't know what was going on in this man's mind or heart or body at this moment, but I like to imagine that he was practicing mindfulness, that he had found a way to act on his values with a particular beautiful and inspiring amount of courage. And he did this by overcoming the obstacles that get in the way in a mindful way. And I'm also personally very inspired, as I'm sure many of you are, by Christian Cooper, the man who faced down Amy Cooper in Central Park several months ago. And just the dignity and poise that he seemed to display in staying calm and responding to Amy Cooper's racist tirade towards him. Just a beautiful display of, in my opinion, mindfulness values and action, even though, again, I don't know exactly what was going on for him. So these are the domains that we're trying to work in. This is the work we want to do. How do we overcome these obstacles? Okay. Let's start with a definition of anti-racism. This is a picture of Ibram Kendi. He's written the very popular book, which I'm sure many of you on this call Know How to Be an Anti-Racist from last year, from 2019. And I'm just paraphrasing some ideas here from Ibram Kendi. The big idea that Kendi puts forth is that while many of us simply equate the word racist with Charlottesville or with old-fashioned definitions of white supremacy, we're really moving away from that binary. Racist is bad, non-racist is good, and more into a definition of racism that focuses on our behaviors and our beliefs, not people. In other words, it's not a character attack. In other words, according to Kendi, we can be racist one minute and anti-racist the next. And when you look at it that way, it raises the important question, what is my behavior right now? And I would suggest that for all of us on this call tonight, unless, of course, you decided to join the talk to be difficult in some way, that you're all engaged in at least a minor moment of anti-racist behavior right now, trying to improve yourselves and figure out ways to take action. Another thing Kendi asks, or shall I say, another thing Kendi asks us to ask ourselves is, what place am I most passionate about reforming? And then can I commit to the long-term struggle and continuous action to change my behavior and this particular system? So this is what we're after. We're after this sort of anti-racist action. Okay. So this is a screenshot of the set of anti-racism resources that were circulated shortly after George Floyd's murder back in June. And I suspect this particular screenshot is familiar to many of you because it was circulated quite widely, at least among my liberal, mostly white friends. I think I must have been forwarded this particular list 10 or 15 times over that month. And I just want to point out that if you dig into what this set of anti-racism resources suggests, you look at the categories that are in this list, here they are. It has a really nice list of articles to read, an equally nice list of videos to watch, podcasts to subscribe to, books to read, films and TV series to watch, and organizations that you can follow on social media. And I know I sort of cherry-picked this particular list to make a point, but the point I would like to make is you can spend the rest of your life engaged in anti-racist action, according to this list of anti-racist resources, literally without ever getting out of bed. And I think we all believe that we need to do better than that. But it's relatively easy to do this and to learn in this way. And I'm not saying that's not important. It is important, and it's relatively easy to even be a part of my talk right now. It's harder to get out of bed, and there are obstacles. So let's talk about that. This is a picture of Ijeoma Oluo, who also wrote a very popular book. She's a Seattle writer, which many of you may know. She wrote the book You Want to Talk About Race, also from last year. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. And Ijeoma says, if BIPOC people, and if you're not familiar with the term BIPOC, by the way, it stands for Black, Indigenous, and Other People of Color. If BIPOC people can't touch or sense the impacts of your anti-racist actions, then you're not actually doing anything. You need tangible impacts. And so we're going to get to this later in the talk, but I just want to challenge everybody right now with Ijeoma Oluo's statement here. We need to get out of bed, and it's hard to do. So let's talk for a few minutes about these obstacles. Typically, when we read these books, when we read Ijeoma Oluo's book, and when we read White Fragility, or when we read these other books, this is the language that describes the obstacles that we face. White fragility keeps us small. White privilege keeps us from really understanding what we have to do. White comfort keeps us from getting out of our comfort zones. Unconscious bias keeps us making the same mistakes over and over again. And this is a bit of a straw man, but typically interventions or workshops or talks, they simply tell us, don't do any of this stuff. Don't be fragile, don't act on your privilege, don't be comfortable, don't be biased. This is what you have to do. And I'm here to tell you that we need to address these obstacles with more nuance and with more psychological meaning. When we're simply told not to do stuff, it's probably better than just doing it. Of course it is. But avoidance and suppression are not effective behavior change strategies in the long run. I'm here to tell you that in the history of white fragility, nobody has stopped being fragile by being told, don't be fragile. It's not an effective behavior change strategy. We know this across all of psychological science and common sense, and many of you know this as well. One of the number one ways that people gain weight is by trying to diet. Simply trying to avoid and suppress eating actually backfires for people. We know this. Really interesting study from sports psychology put hockey players in front of an empty net and told them, whatever you do, don't miss the net on this side. And when they're told, don't miss here, guess what? They're more likely to miss in the very spot they're trying not to miss at. We know this across hundreds of psychological research studies that when we're just told to suppress stuff, it backfires. There's, of course, the famous don't think about a white bear experiment from Wagner back in 1987. That's been cited over 1,000 times at this point. We know that when we try to just suppress behavior, it tends to backfire for us. And this is the difficulty we have when we're talking about white fragility, white privilege, comfort, and all of these biases that surface for us. Just trying to suppress it tends not to work very long. So, another thing that happens when we try to not be fragile, not privileged, not comfort, etc., is we actually increase our own anxiety. The more we talk about bias, the more we talk about privilege and fragility, the higher our anxiety gets. This is a study from 2015 that shows down here, people who do not have awareness of bias, they actually have lower interracial anxiety. Interracial anxiety is essentially when you're interacting with somebody who's different from you, how anxious are you going to be? When you're not aware of bias, your anxiety is low. When you are aware of your own bias, your anxiety is higher. And that happens for people who are high prejudice people, good old-fashioned prejudice people, or low prejudice people like liberal people in Seattle who want to believe that they're low prejudice. So we have these paradoxical effects of a lot of our efforts to overcome the obstacles where we're actually potentially making things worse and increasing rather than decreasing the anxiety that gets in our way. So the last thing I'll say here is, as we move into mindfulness as a strategy for overcoming these obstacles, rather than simply trying to avoid or suppress, another really important benefit of mindfulness is empathy. This is a study from 2008, a review of over 500 studies of prejudice reduction. And when people actually show a reduction in their own prejudice, what caused it? The biggest factor that actually matters is empathy. Having empathy for people who are different from us is absolutely crucial to this work. Yet, when we're anxious, when we're focused on just suppressing behavior, all of that interferes with our ability to truly accurately empathize with people who are different. And mindfulness helps with that as well. So, Lily asked me to share some of my own research, and I didn't want to get too intellectual with all of you tonight. but I will share this one study that we did briefly just to give you a little sense of it. And then we'll get into some examples. And so the study that my colleagues and I did focused on trying to improve how medical students interact with Black patients. There's a large literature of healthcare disparities and all of the ways that medical interactions go wrong for Black patients, which decreases their trust, decreases their sense of trust in the doctors, decreases their follow through, and leads to all sorts of downstream problems. And so we want to actually improve how medical students interact with Black patients. And what we did is we used standardized patients, Black actors who worked with us, who we hired. It looks something like this. This is an example of a Black actor who gave us this example based on his own experience. Imagine you're the medical student in our study. You're interacting with our standardized patient. The standardized patient has been trained to challenge you in some ways that you're not ready for. And so in this case, the standardized patient says to you, you know, my last doctor told me I was fat, Black, and lazy. I'm not going back there. So now, how do you respond? This is what we studied. We wanted to see if in these really crucial, challenging moments that we could improve doctors responding. These are really important moments for Black patients because these are really important experiences in their lives. Now, what we found for our control group is that the typical response was something like, that sounds really unpleasant. We'll make sure that kind of stuff doesn't happen here. Let's get back to the interview because we only have a few minutes. That's typically how they responded. Some of you may be thinking, well, that's not really that bad a response. And I'm here to tell you that from the perspective of the Black patient, it's not a good response. And so we gave the students a 6-hour workshop. We didn't do exactly the same exercises that I'm going to do with you all tonight, but they were in the same spirit, very much focused on mindfulness and empathy and reducing anxiety in these ways. And what we wanted to see was an improvement in the interaction such that the medical student would be able to say something like this instead to the patient. You know, that was a really racist thing for your last doctor to say. And then once the medical student has in such a straightforward and clear way, validated and named the racism, then that opens up all sorts of possibilities for what can happen between the patient and the doctor next. So again, I won't get you into the details of the study in too much more detail, but that's essentially what we did. We had a control group that just met with the standardized patients before and after, and then we had an intervention group that met with the standardized patients before and after, and then had this workshop in between. So what we found is that when we actually measured the quality of the medical students' behavior, we actually recorded these interactions and measured how well they did. We saw no change at all in the control group, which is what we would expect. And we saw a really significant and nice change for our intervention group. And what we thought was important about this study was we're actually measuring behavior. We're actually measuring how they're showing up and interacting. We're not just measuring attitudes here. Okay, I don't want to get too much more into the research, but just a little sample of some of the stuff we did. What I want to do now is walk through with all of you 3 examples of ways people can engage in anti-racist behavior. And I want to talk about the obstacles that show up and keep people from doing this. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to simply name some of the things that many of you would be uncomfortable naming, but I know that at least many of us feel. And quite honestly, I'm not really naming too many things here that I haven't felt or thought at some point myself. I truly believe this is hard stuff. So here's the first example. Imagine that you are going to attend and truly, fully participate in, say, a Black Lives Matter protest. So the question before us is, What are the obstacles that show up for you? And I'm just going to name some that I think show up for at least some of us. Maybe you worry, well, do they even want white people at the protest? Or maybe you worry, okay, I'm going to go to the protest, but I'm going to sort of keep quiet, keep to myself. I don't want to say the wrong thing. They're just going to think that I'm another racist white person. Or maybe you think, what difference will it make if I go? Or maybe you think, some of these protesters are pretty extreme. I don't know if I agree with everything that they're saying and doing. And that keeps you from going. Or maybe you say, or you're worried, I'm scared. Is this protest going to be safe? Now, I said to you at the beginning of this talk that I'm assuming we're all on the same page with respect to the fact that racial discrimination in the United States is a big problem, and I don't want to debate or argue any of this stuff. And so I've put these obstacles up here. And again, I want to encourage all of you to not get too hooked by the content of the concern, by the content of the obstacle. I'm just hoping you can recognize that if this thought, if this worry shows up in your mind, it might change your behavior. It might keep you from going to the protest. Or if you do go to the protest, it might keep you small at the protest. I'm interested in identifying these obstacles for all of you so that you can see how the obstacle functions and changes your behavior. Next example. Imagine, I don't know what kind of work setting you're in, but I apologize for this Shutterstock image, which makes it look like we're all in these very fancy work settings. But imagine you're in a work setting, you're having a meeting, your boss says something potentially racially offensive, or perhaps there's a policy in your work setting that is a racially problematic policy. So the anti-racist action is in the meeting, in the moment, to challenge and question your boss or your chair or your supervisor or whoever it might be, to challenge and question this person on the biased racial policy. What might show up as an obstacle for you in that moment? Well, here's one. What if Bill, just my placeholder name for your black coworker, what if Bill doesn't want me to make an issue of this? What if he gets upset with me for saying it or saying it wrong? Or, oh, it's going to be so awkward if I say something, or maybe you don't quite have words for the awkwardness, but you're just feeling the discomfort in your body and it's all happening too fast and you just can't sort it out in time. Or maybe you think, will there be a backlash if I speak up? Will my boss get upset with me? Will this affect my status here? Or maybe you start buying these thoughts and you think, oh, this is bad, but it's really not my responsibility to fix this. It's bigger than me. It's really not that big of a deal. And now you've talked yourself out of this action. So as I provide these examples, I hope I can convey empathy. I think it's really hard to coordinate our behavior in these moments and to do the courageous thing. And my goal is to help us with that, but I also recognize that it's not easy. Okay. One last example. And this is the example I gave before. My last doctor told me I was fat, black, and lazy. I'm not going back there. Imagine you're interacting with this man and he just said this to you. The anti-racist action that I'm proposing is essentially to directly acknowledge the racism and say what's probably in most people's hearts in this moment. I think when most people hear this phrase, they think, wow, that was a really racist thing. So in this example, if you can imagine interacting with this guy, and perhaps in your heart is this thought, that was a really racist thing for your last doctor to say. Now, what are the obstacles that get in the way of you saying that? Stuff shows up where we don't actually say what's in our hearts in these moments. Things get all twisted and turned around. So I'm not sure exactly what shows up for you, but perhaps it's something like this. How do I know he's telling the truth? Maybe he misinterpreted what the doctor said. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe that's just him being too sensitive. What if I end up reinforcing a discrimination complaint? I don't want to set this guy down this path. I don't want to contribute to cancel culture and get this last doctor fired. Or perhaps, and I get this a lot in the medical center, legal affairs would never let me say that. I can't be so blunt about racism. I'm going to get into trouble. So these are just some samples of, I think, the obstacles that tend to show up for people. And I've been pretty blunt about this. I'm aware that I'm saying things that people don't usually say. I'm saying them right now in this talk, honestly, so you don't have to. And all I'm hoping you all can do right now is just stay with me. Stay with me and explore together. So what I'd like to do now with these obstacles in the room is share with all of you a few exercises to give you a little sense for how to use mindfulness to overcome these sorts of obstacles. And before, I had the words white fragility, white privilege, white comfort, and implicit bias as the list of obstacles. And here I want to use these phrases: anxiety, passivity, and defensiveness. I think we can go pretty far in understanding what people mean by fragility, privilege, comfort. I think we can go pretty far in understanding what people mean with those words by using these words, which honestly, we can do a better job of locating these issues in our minds, in our hearts, and in our bodies. And we can use mindfulness to overcome these issues. So I'm going to start with this little metaphor called passengers on the bus. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this metaphor called passengers on the bus, but it goes a little bit like this. So over the last several minutes, I was sharing with you a whole bunch of obstacles that can show up for people in different situations. I would like you all to consider in this metaphor that you're a bus driver and you're driving the bus, and each of these obstacles is like a different person that gets on the bus with you. So the first question to ask with this metaphor is, where do you want to drive the bus? What are your values and goals? You get to pick the bus route in this metaphor. So what I want to do now actually is ask all of you to give me a response. And I want to ask you to simply put it into the chat function. And I'm going to hopefully be able to read the chat as you do that. I want to ask you, can you just put a word or two, or maybe a sentence, no more than a sentence, that answers the question, who do I want to be with respect to anti-racism? What is the value that's driving me? What is the most important value for me? Just a word or two that helps you identify the thing that's really important. So for example, for myself, the word might be empathy, or the word might simply be courage. And I see people now are putting in some words into chat. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read some of these words to all of you as we do this. This is great. Let me go up to the top here. I'll keep people anonymous. Fairness, kindness, courage, connectedness, love, walking the walk, empathy, justice, harmony, integrity, liberation, another vote for courage, fearless, which is really another vote for courage, justice, another vote for courage, respect, connection, a few more justices, compassion, compassion, a bridge builder, humanity, freedom, caring. This is great. Thank you all for doing this. Giving, inclusivity, curiosity. Yeah, I'm hoping, and if you don't want to chat a response right now, that's fine. I am hoping, because I'm going to use it in just a few minutes, I am hoping for you to at least identify to yourself just a word or two that brings meaning to your body. This is who I want to be. This is my best self with respect to anti-racism. And of course, it's more complicated than this. I'm simplifying it with just a word. A few more words here for you. Caring, vulnerable, fullness, compassion again, barrier breaker. Sorry, I can't read everybody's words here. Curiosity, fierce, great word. Assertive, great word. Okay, for sake of time, I'll stop here. Thank you all for those words. Again, if I didn't read your word, I am hoping for you to just find a word for yourself, because we'll use it in a minute. So back to the passengers on the bus metaphor. The idea is that you can drive this bus in whatever direction you want, no matter which passengers are on the bus with you. If you are going to this protest, for example, and you want to not just go to the protest, but engage in the protest in a courageous or empathic or fierce or barrier-breaking way, you want to really show up as your best self at this protest, then the metaphor is that all of those little thoughts and feelings that are going to keep you small, they're going to come on the bus as you're getting there. They're going to join. They may even get really loud. They may be screaming at you. They may be telling you, turn left here, turn the bus around. Don't go to the protest. It's too dangerous. You're going to get yourself in trouble. People are going to think you're a white racist. The idea is that you can keep driving this bus no matter what these passengers are saying to you. And I just want to point out that this is a very different mechanism, a very different strategy than just trying to suppress all of this, just trying to tell yourself you're not thinking it or feeling it. It's mindfulness, but to be clear, it's not mindfulness in the service of comfort. It's mindfulness in the service of overcoming obstacles such that you can be your best self and engage in anti-racist action. Okay. The next exercise. I'm just checking the time here. Okay. The next exercise is what we call the hand on the door mindfulness exercise. The reason we call it the hand on the door exercise is because, sorry, too quick on that slide. The reason we call it the hand on the door exercise is because we've sometimes taught it to doctors or other medical providers. And the idea is it's a very quick mindfulness breathing exercise that you can do literally while your hand is on the door and you're about to go into the exam room and interact with somebody. And so in our case here tonight, the idea is that it's a brief mindfulness exercise that you can do right before entering an interaction, right before going to this meeting, right before showing up at that protest, right before going to talk to your father-in-law or whoever it may be about whatever it may be, even though my father-in-law is an absolutely lovely person. It's a brief exercise that you can do quickly. It's of course not going to solve everything. These mindfulness exercises aren't going to make all the racism go away, but it can get you centered such that you are more likely to show up as fully anti-racist in the moment. There's one study, actually there's dozens of studies of the effects of mindfulness meditation on bias. This is just one study I'm showing here. I like the study because it was a brief 10-minute mindfulness meditation, and just 10 minutes of mindfulness meditation produce significant decreases in bias related to race and biases related to age. You can reduce implicit racism bias and you can reduce implicit ageism bias with just 10 minutes of mindfulness meditation. Now, an important point here is that the effects don't last. You can't just do 10 minutes of mindfulness and then you're good to go for the next month. It has to be an ongoing practice. And that's why I like this idea of hand on the door, that cold door handle can be your reminder. Before turning the door handle, let's do 30 seconds of this. So this is what it looks like. So previously, you all identified your values. That word I asked you to write down, courageous or fierce or barrier breaker or whatever it is, keep that in mind as we do this. I would like you to all imagine, if you're willing to do this with me for just 2 or so minutes, I would like you to all imagine you're about to have an interaction with somebody who's different from you, somebody who maybe makes you nervous. Or perhaps you're about to go into a context or a room where race and racism are going to be discussed, and you're nervous, and you're liable to stay small. Imagine you're about to enter this space, this room, you're about to have this interaction. Now with me if you're willing, and you can close your eyes if you'd like, I would like you to start by just taking a few gentle breaths. Do this right now, please. Just take a nice, slow, gentle breath. As you breathe in, allow your attention to follow your breath into your body. Simply notice what you feel. Gently notice your mind and whatever you're feeling. As you breathe out, just say that word to yourself like a mantra. Breathe in gently. Notice your feelings. And breathe out. Say your word. Courage. Breathe in. Explore. Notice your body. Notice your feelings with acceptance. Breathe out. Say your word. Barrier breaker. Do this for 30 seconds and then go in the room. Engage in whatever you're about to do. Again, I don't expect this to solve everything. It's not meant to make anxiety or discomfort go away, but it can get us just centered enough that we can act with more purpose and intention in these spaces. Okay. Now, I have about 15 minutes, and I want to do one more exercise with all of you. This exercise, I will admit to you, makes me nervous to do with such a large crowd because it can be difficult and painful. But I want to do it. I want to give it a try with all of you. I told you at the beginning that there was going to be one exercise here that would be a bit painful, and this is it. So, of course, you all have choice. Maybe you've already tuned me out at this point in the evening. I don't know. You all have choice as I go through this exercise. It's called Your Worst Fears Are True. I want to start by touching a third rail a little more. I've already touched a few third rails here. I'm going to touch this one. Yes, my dear, all white people are racists. I put this example in the room because I know it generates a ton of defensiveness in white people. It's from a Medium post by Marley Kay. I don't know who Marley Kay is. I do know that if you want to practice overcoming defensiveness as a white person, then you should read these Medium posts, because these Medium posts are an opportunity for people to be really blunt and direct about the problem right now. Here's what Marley Kay had to write. Yes, my dears, all white people are racists, all of them. Here's where you stop to cry, clutch your pearls, rant and rave aloud to tell me how wrong I am, and to tell me not all white people. And so I suspect at least some of you are thinking this right now. Clutch your pearls. I don't have any pearls. I don't want to be one of those racist people. And again, to go back to the beginning, I'm not here to debate this with people. And I think some people would want to debate this. I don't want to do that right now. What I instead want to do is talk about how this can show up as an obstacle, how the defensiveness around this kinds of stuff can keep people from being as anti-racist as they actually want to be. When you connect with your values, you don't want this to be an obstacle for you. So as we lean into this last mindfulness exercise, I wanted to actually play with this very powerful comment here and try to work on the defensiveness that shows up for people in response. So this man, who for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to call Bill. Again, I would like to ask you to imagine you're having an interaction with him. Now, of course, I know you're not all medical providers, so I ask you to be creative. You can imagine interacting with him in whatever context makes sense to you. Maybe you meet him at work and you're talking about things and he shares this with you. Maybe you meet him at a social event or at the sideline of your kid's soccer game, or at the gym if you're going to the gym in a socially distant way. I don't know, but I just want to ask you to imagine you're interacting with Bill here, and he not only says this to you, but he also says this to you. My experience is that all white people are racist. Okay? So what we want to do in this moment is do a rather long mindfulness exercise. And I first want to ask you to imagine what you might be feeling in your body in this moment with Bill. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe defensiveness wouldn't show up for most of you. And if that's the case, that's wonderful. Maybe it would be really easy for you to find a way to say to him, wow, that was a really racist thing for your last doctor to say. And yeah, I understand why you feel that all white people are racist. I'm going to do the best I can to be as anti-racist as possible, but I understand why you feel that way. Okay, I'm going to do this exercise with you now. It has 3 parts. The first part is about leaning into discomfort. The second part is what I'm going to call capacity building. And the third part is about empathy. And I'm going to ask you to locate a painful area of your own life and then lean into that area in a way that we don't usually do. And if this works for you, if this mindfulness meditation works for you, it will be difficult. It may not work for you, but if it does, it will be difficult. I'm going to encourage you during this meditation to lean in and to allow yourself to feel some difficult feelings. The reason we do this is because it is human nature to want to avoid pain, to avoid difficult feelings because they're painful. So it's perfectly natural to want to avoid them. For example, if there was a hot stove in front of me, I wouldn't put my hand on it because that would be pain and I can avoid it. But, and I think you all agree with me, there are areas of life where we willingly lean into and bring on unpleasant feelings. We do this on purpose. We do this because it's important to do so. Can any of you think of examples in your own life right now when you've purposefully leaned in and brought on unpleasant feelings? For me, for example, it was honestly getting out of bed this morning. It was warm in bed, it was comfortable in my bed, and it was cold out of the bed. I didn't want to get out of bed, but I did, as I do every day. And I do this every day because there are things I want to accomplish and people who need me. We all sometimes do things knowing that it will be difficult. Maybe for you, it's exercising. Maybe for you, it's spending time with your parents, even though you know they're going to annoy you. Maybe if you are a woman who has given birth, for some women, giving birth is, not all, but for some women, giving birth is one of the most painful experiences of their lives. But they do it. They do it for love. They do it for life. They do it for family. They do it for meaning. So If this exercise works for you, I want to cultivate that kind of feeling. And again, you can bail out at any point. Okay, here we go. Let's start this meditation by getting comfortable in your chair and get yourself comfortable. You may choose to close your eyes if you would like, but you don't have to. I would like to ask you to start by following your breath as we did a few moments ago. Let your attention settle on your breath. I'm going to ask you to contemplate something for a few moments. It's not an easy thing to contemplate, and it may make you sad. It may make you angry or upset. It may make you start crying. You can, of course, choose not to do this. We all have things in our lives that are too hard to think about. We all have things in our lives that are so painful, we don't want to think about them at all. Maybe the thing that you just don't want to think about is the result of the upcoming election this year. We tell ourselves we can't tolerate what may happen. Maybe it's something more personal. Maybe there's a friend or a family member who is struggling with an addiction or who is sick. Maybe you are having challenges in an intimate relationship. Your relationship is falling apart and it's not going to get any better. Maybe you're having a really hard time getting through school and it's just not going to work out. Maybe you or a loved one are scared or sick that you may not get to live as long as you want, as long as you had planned and hoped. We all have these really difficult things in our lives. This is in fact what makes us human. I want to ask you to imagine for a moment, if you're willing, one of these things. One life experience that is usually too hard for you to think about. You just can't stand it. What's the thing that you just can't stand? Consider this possibility if you're willing. It might not change. It might be true. The bad thing might happen. Maybe life won't work out the way we hoped. Maybe we can't stop this from happening. Maybe in this area, life is truly unfair. If you're still with me, I invite you to hold on to this feeling for a moment. This horribly unfair thing, it can happen, and it won't get fixed. Consider this possibility. You can make space for this feeling in your mind. You can make space for it in your heart and your body. You don't have to push it away. As I talked at the beginning of this talk, we have the capacity to feel all of it. We can feel it. We don't have to push it away. We are like a water balloon, and we can expand, fill up with these feelings, and we will not burst. We are strong enough to have these feelings and everything that comes with them. This is, after all, what it means to be human. We are built to feel, and to feel a lot, even if our minds tell us we can't. Take a few breaths. I would like to ask you now to return to Bill, the standardized patient in my example, the person who, in this hypothetical, you were interacting with. who says to you, all white people are racist. If you have your eyes open, I've given you a close-up of his face. Perhaps you can imagine his voice. Perhaps you can gently make eye contact with him through the computer screen. This idea, all white people are racist, it's not just an abstract idea. It's something that he feels. He's a human being. I would like to ask you to first consider the possibility that you and Bill are similar in some important ways. Perhaps you may be a person of color who knows all too well the experiences of racism that he's shared. Perhaps you may be a white person who, despite not knowing what it is like to be treated in this way, you do have a sense for what it's like to be mistreated. You do know what it's like to be rejected and dismissed. You can share a little of it. You and Bill probably have a desire, both of you, to make a big difference in this world. You both have hopes and dreams about life. You both care deeply about your families, your friends. What if Bill's life experience, the things that led him to his beliefs, what if Bill's life experience is one of those things that is so hard for you to feel that you don't want to? What if, at a fundamental level, his life experience is like that thing you don't want to think about in your own life? That is actually physically uncomfortable for you to really let all of it in. What if his experience, the oppression and discrimination in his life, is as bad as that thing that we started with in this meditation? The thing you don't want to believe, because you want to believe that life is fair, that things will work out. What if it already exists for Bill? It's already true. Consider how much you don't know about Bill, his life, his history, all the things that have happened to him, all of the experiences. Consider one last thing as we end this meditation. Consider the possibility that the various people who have caused him harm in his life, the oppression in his life, some or many of them looked exactly like you. It's not your fault that they did, but they did. I would like to ask you all to take a few gentle breaths, and then we'll end this meditation. It's hard to gauge how people are feeling in this virtual space. I suspect some of you may have tuned me out. Some of you may have followed me and are feeling a lot. Others may just be confused. The goal here is to demonstrate how mindfulness and values and empathy can be used to slow down, to create space, to move you into a different perspective, such that you can approach situations with my hypothetical Bill. You can approach situations like going to the protest or speaking up at work or whatever it may be for you. You can approach it differently. You can approach these things with less anxiety, less passivity, less defensiveness, more mindfulness, more awareness of your values, more centeredness, more ability to be who you really want to be. I want to end now with just a few minutes. Let me see. Yeah, 5 minutes on this final idea of action. If you've been following me and you're feeling anything right now, I want to give you something to do with those feelings. So I want to go back to Ijeoma Oluo. This is essentially the last paragraph of her book. So you want to talk about race. This is where she ends. And I want to start here with a few minutes on action with how she ends, in the hope that it will inspire you and give you a path. She writes, all around the country, people are effecting real change with small actions. Change that improves the lives of people of color in their towns and cities and weakens an oppressive system. Racial oppression starts in our homes, our offices, our cities, and our states. And it can end there as well. We can do this together. So I have just a few slides now to orient you to some concrete actions that you can all take, that you can all consider. And I'm just going to read you these quickly, and then I'll open it up for discussion and questions. This is essentially a paraphrase, my own paraphrase of what Ijeoma Oluo has written in her book, and also what she talks about in some of her recent talks. So I've paraphrased it a little bit. I've added one or two things of my own, but it's mostly Ijeoma Oluo's ideas here, just to be clear. Number one, find buddies and do this work together. In fact, if there's one suggestion I have for all of you tonight, it would be that immediately after ending this call, find two of your friends and say, let's form a little anti-racism group and hold each other accountable and check in with each other week after week and encourage each other to keep acting. I think too much of this work asks people to do this work alone. I want you to find people you can talk to, people in your own networks, and join together and do this work together. According to Ijeoma Oluo, you can start small, and also consistent with Ibram Kendi, find your own spaces, find your backyard, do research on your organization or your community. There are all sorts of activists available to tell us what's going on in our neck of the woods. What are the problems right here for me in Green Lake? What are the problems for you in Ballard or wherever you may be? Work in your own backyard, set specific goals, start small, and use your own strengths. If you're an accountant, work on the numbers. If you're an artist, find creative ways to get involved. If you're a psychologist like myself, offer mental health support. Whatever you do in your life, find ways to use your strengths to do the anti-racism work. A few more suggestions from Ijeoma Oluo. Vote. Vote local. I don't need to tell all of you that. Get in the schools. If we want to make change in the long run, we got to work with the families and the communities through the schools. Speak up everywhere you can. Support BIPOC businesses. Boycott problematic businesses. Do these things on a regular basis, week after week. Do it all the time. Make this a lifestyle. Here's an idea from Ijeoma Oluo. Do an audit of one day in your life. Wake up in the morning and pay attention. Are there any racially biased processes happening in my space right now? How many Black or Indigenous or other people of color am I interacting with? Who are the people closest to me who help me make decisions? How much diversity is there in my networks? Am I getting exposed to information about what's going on with respect to racism and race-related issues? Just spend one day, pay attention throughout the day, write it down, see what you learn. And finally, donate. Donate a lot more than you're comfortable with. Trust me, you'll be fine. We're so focused on money and happiness. I don't have to give you that talk. We know money doesn't buy happiness. We know this. I could give you the research on it. Donate more than you're comfortable with. Money is important to anti-racism work. These organizations need it. You know that, and I don't need to tell you this. And finally, this is my last slide. A few things more on the personal work. That list of anti-racism resources that I made fun of at the beginning of the talk, it's a good list, but it's just a good list for this top bullet. There's so much more to do. Educate yourself. read everything. In particular, really learn US history. Buy Jill Lepore's book. Get out of your bubble. Connect with BIPOC people. Develop real relationships. If there's one thing we know from 50 years of work on prejudice, is we know that you can't do this if you're only interacting with people who look like you. You have to interact with people who are different. You have to develop real relationships, but you have to do this naturally. You have to earn people's trust. Immerse yourself in other cultures to the extent you can. Address your own microaggressions and biases. More to say there, I don't have time. And seek feedback. We talked before about defensiveness. Seek it out. Bring it on yourself on purpose and be willing to change course. And finally, and I hope I achieved that tonight in this talk, center BIPOC humanity, agency, and safety in everything you do, even when you're just with white peers. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I'm a few minutes behind, but we still have a good amount of time for questions. I suspect people are feeling a decent amount right now, and I will stop. Okay, Lily, I think
Thank you,
it's back to
Jonathan.
you.
Thank you. I welcome you to type your questions in the Q&A. We're happy to take questions as they're coming up for you. I know we're all still healing and processing. Thank you, Jonathan, for that experience. One question that came up early on was some clarification on the study you presented, your study with medical students in the intervention. And the question that came up was, I think just needs clarification. Isn't it unethical for the control patients to have the doctors walk in and not have improved in their response to that? And in fact, the patient was a part of the study.
Yeah, so we didn't use real patients. We used standardized patients, which are essentially actors who the UW medicine system uses for medical training throughout the system. And so we worked very closely with these standardized patients and had the medical students interacting with fake patients.
Yeah, and it struck me that question, we should be asking that about all of our interactions then. I mean, if it would have been unethical in the study for someone to receive the unimproved message from the doctor, then that's true in every interaction we have.
You know, I'll say one more thing about that question. The fact is, it's really clear to me from working with my BIPOC colleagues for years that responding to that situation by saying, wow, that was a really racist thing to say, that's an improvement. I'm really clear that that's, not that I want to script it for people, but I'm really clear that we want doctors to say something like that, something authentic like that, that's clear. But it's really difficult to get doctors to do it. It's hard. And with humility, even though my study had good results, it's still hard. So we don't have too many options in the research other than to have these control conditions and hope that the doctors do the best they can. It's a lot of work to do to change behavior.
Yeah. We have a question. Would you consider this similar to, or would you call it anti-racist acceptance and commitment therapy? If not, how is it different?
Okay, so this is a question from somebody who's in the know here. Yeah, if you're interested, I can send you some chapters where we walk through the theoretical, clinical foundations of some of these exercises, and it's directly from ACT. Some of those exercises were directly from acceptance and commitment therapy. So you're right to name that, absolutely. It's not therapy. I'm sorry. It's not therapy. It's not we're not doing therapy. So it's not ACT, but it's definitely exercises. At least the passengers on the bus in particular was borrowed from ACT.
So your idea of getting out of our bubble and engaging with people is critically important. And this question is, how do we do this during the pandemic? If this person is saying they feel very isolated, but we shouldn't wait till COVID is over for us to do this work?
Yeah. Well, the problems of connection and socializing with people who are different from us are even harder now with COVID, because one of the things that I think has happened with COVID is we've all sort of hunkered down with the people who we know and are most comfortable with. And so it's even harder to reach out. But if you're working in an office setting where there is diversity, or if there is some diversity in your school's PTSA, or if your kid is on a sports team and there's some diversity, it feels courageous for many of us, but you can reach out and you can say, hey, let's get together. And I'm not saying let's get together. I don't want to encourage you to reach out to a person of color and say, let's get together because I'm trying to be more anti-racist and I need to have a black friend. I'm not saying that. I'm saying do what you do to actually get to know people, to make real relationships, to build trust and to build community. So I know it's difficult right now, and it just requires a little push. But I just encourage you to try to build real relationships with people in your networks who are different from you. Let it happen naturally. Let trust and relationship build naturally over time, but put the work in.
Another question here, and this is challenging because you don't work in child welfare arenas, but the question is what do we do when we're working in institutions like child welfare or other institutions similar that are really we're founded on racism? How do we practice anti-racism when the institutions have been founded on it?
Yeah, my immediate response to that question is humility, in that I don't actually feel like I have a strong answer, but I will riff on it for a minute if that's okay. I have to admit, as I do this work as a psychologist, and I lean in, as I hopefully did today with all of you, as I lean in with empathy and compassion and gentleness and mindfulness, another part of me says, Jonathan, things are too far gone. Another part of me wants to just arm myself and go to war. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting or inciting. My lawyers tell me that I need to say I'm not inciting violence by saying that, but I'm just telling you this is how I feel. I think there's great conflicts with respect to knowing the right way to approach all of this right now, whether you just want to burn down the house, metaphorically, or whether you want to work from within the house and make change. So I don't have an easy answer for you on that, but what I can suggest is that you find buddies and work together. You know, come up with strategies and plans, other people in your organization, and join those efforts. There are activists everywhere, and you can join them and you can just support them. And these are people who are working to dismantle the system from within and from without, and they're going to keep going day after day. And they're not going to get stuck by these questions of hopelessness or how do I do this? And your job is to learn from them, find them and learn from them. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, there's some requests for some of the resources, and we'll put those in maybe the email that goes out to you when we're done. And I'll take this one last question. Can you give an example of responding to a racist comment at work in a group meeting with your boss?
Lily, help me interpret that question. An example from my own life?
I'm going to guess that they want sort of a concrete example of how you would respond. If someone at a work meeting, your boss, someone above you has said something racist,
Yeah.
What would be an anti-racist, courageous thing to say?
I mean, it's hard to just say without context. And of course, it depends on who your boss is and how defensive that person's going to, get. And I think the biggest obstacle is perhaps one that I didn't mention, which is that we wish we could sort of call a timeout in the universe, such that we could organize our thoughts and come up with a thing to say, rather than have that thing to say show up 4 hours later when we're lying in bed ruminating about what we didn't say. And so what I encourage you to do is trust your instincts and try to just blurt something out. Try to just blurt something out. That's the courage. That's the sort of mindfulness. I don't know exactly what to say or what not to say, but staying silent is going to get me nowhere. And so it could just be whatever sort of comes naturally to you. Wow, I'm confused. Or ouch, did you really just say that? Or, oh, I kind of think that's a little racist. Or, oh, I'm not sure if I should say anything and I'm ruminating in my head right now, but I just need to sort of start a conversation because I'm trying to be more anti-racist. Or I went to this talk through CCFW last week, and they encouraged me to speak up even if I didn't know what to say. So I'm speaking up right now, and I don't want to offend you, but I need to say something. My point is, I don't know if I can script it out for you or give you an example, but just try to get something out, and then the consequences will happen, and then you're at least in the game now. And I'll say one last thing about this. There have been multiple times in my life when somebody has said something offensive or racist, and I've been small and quiet, and I haven't done the thing that I'm telling y'all to do. I don't like admitting that. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I'm one of the more courageous people in this group. There have been multiple times when I've just been quiet, and then afterwards I've thought of the perfect thing to say, and it's been too late. So I just want to recognize that's part of the process. But I will also say that there have been multiple times when I have said the hard thing. And it's often come out of my mouth in an awkward way. It hasn't come out gracefully. But I have said the hard thing multiple times. Sometimes it's come out with anger, which gets me into trouble. But what I will tell you is this: of all the times in which I've said the hard thing, whether it's been poorly said or gracefully said or angry or whatever, nothing bad has ever happened to me as a consequence. I haven't always gotten the change I've wanted, but the fear that keeps me silent, those fears have never happened. I always survive. And so my encouragement is to try to just take the risk. And if you don't, you'll do it the next time. But the odds of something bad happening to you, other than maybe just a brief moment of discomfort or anger in response or whatever, other than that, bad things tend not to happen when I do it. And in fact, sometimes good things happen.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for that powerful experience. And hopefully we're all walking away with a little bit more strength and courage for the next time that comes up. Really appreciate that. Thank you all for joining us.
Oh, Lily, can I say one last thing before we end?
Please, yeah.
If you like how we did this tonight, and I know it's not for everybody, but if you appreciated this kind of experience and want more of it, we are planning, it's not settled yet, but we are planning to do something that would be more like a course, maybe 4 weeks or 6 weeks with CCFW, where we would get together and meet weekly or perhaps bi-weekly for 4 or 6 weeks and really dive deep into this material and really try to help people get some action going. If you're interested in that, just keep your eyes peeled as Lily and I figure out if anything like this is possible, but hopefully it'll be pretty soon. And if we do that course, I just want to just be really clear about one thing, just like tonight. We would charge for that course, but after CCFW just make sure they're not losing money, all of the proceeds, all of my profits would go towards donating to anti-racist organizations, just to make sure you all know that I'm not making any money off of this as an advertisement. So keep your eyes up for that if you're interested.
Thanks, Jonathan. We're really looking forward to hopefully putting that together pretty soon. So there will be follow-up email. You'll probably already have an email where you have an opportunity to let us know what you thought about tonight. So please respond to that survey. And a recording of this lecture will be available pretty soon, in a few days. We'll notify people when it's available if you wanted to share it with others. You can go to our website and see upcoming classes and lectures. We have this upcoming lecture with Barbara Burns and a training. She's done some remarkable work working with parents in communities who are struggling and experiencing adversity, families, Latinx families with vulnerable immigration status. So I think she has a lot of valuable experience to bring and share. Yeah, and look for some information about an upcoming class that Jonathan just mentioned. So we'll be sending out some emails, and hopefully you'll be able to connect with us in some of these future events. Thank you again for joining us tonight. And again, Jonathan, thank you for that really powerful experience. I hope we're all leaving with a little more strength and courage than we came with.
Thank you, Lily.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.